The fog hung heavy, a spectral shroud clinging to the fields surrounding Reims. It was September 3rd, 1944, and the air tasted of diesel and damp earth, a grim cocktail that perfectly captured the mood. The war had clawed its way across France, leaving a trail of destruction and desperation in its wake. The Red Ball Express, that legendary lifeline of trucks, strained under the insatiable demands of the Allied advance, a vital artery struggling to pump enough blood to keep the war machine alive. The rumble of engines, the constant drone of transport planes overhead. These were the sounds of hope and impending victory, but also of exhaustion and the ever-present threat of death. Eddie Brooks was one cog in that machine, a Red Ball Express driver with eyes that held too much knowledge for a man his age. He wasn't a hero, not in his own estimation. Just a guy from Ohio, thrust into a world of tanks and tyranny. Before the war, he'd been a mechanic, greasy hands and a love for engines his defining characteristics. Now, those hands gripped a steering wheel, navigating treacherous roads, dodging shell craters, and praying to make it back in one piece. He was haunted by choices made in haste, a convoy lost to enemy fire, a mistake that cost lives. He drove with a gnawing guilt, a constant reminder of the price of failure. He believed in order, in following the rules, but the war had a way of blurring those lines. Corporal Claire Marchand stood in stark contrast to Eddie's weariness. A whirlwind of focused energy, she was a logistics specialist with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. Being French, this war wasn't just some abstract concept. It was about liberating her homeland, freeing her family from the Nazi yoke. She possessed a pragmatism born of necessity, a willingness to bend the rules, even break them, if it meant getting the job done. She saw the bigger picture, the strategic imperative, and she wouldn't let bureaucracy or fear stand in her way. She knew the importance of every gallon of fuel, every round of ammunition, and she was determined to deliver, no matter the obstacles. The situation was dire. General Patton's Third Army, a spearhead of the Allied advance, was poised to strike a decisive blow. Metz, a strategic stronghold, lay within reach, a gateway to Germany itself. But the Third Army was running on fumes, its tanks sputtering, its momentum grinding to a halt. The official supply lines, already stretched to their breaking point, couldn't keep up. The Red Ball Express, for all its valiant efforts, was simply inadequate. Delay meant opportunity for the enemy, a chance to regroup, to fortify, to turn the tide. Failure to seize Metz could stall the entire Allied offensive, prolonging the war and costing countless lives. The urgency was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on every soldier, every driver, every logistics officer. Claire had a solution, audacious, bordering on insane. An unauthorized fuel convoy, a clandestine operation to circumvent the official channels and deliver the desperately needed fuel directly to Patton's doorstep. It was a high-stakes gamble, a blatant violation of regulations, but she saw no other way. Desperate times, she reasoned, called for desperate measures. The risk of court-martial, of imprisonment, paled in comparison to the potential consequences of inaction. Eddie, however, was hesitant. He'd seen what happened when corners were cut, when rules were ignored. He voiced his concerns, the litany of potential disasters, discovery by military police, accusations of theft, sabotage, even collaboration with the enemy. The consequences were severe, ranging from dishonorable discharge to imprisonment, or worse. He'd witnessed the chaos and the cost of recklessness, and he wasn't eager to repeat the experience. Claire countered, her voice laced with conviction. She argued that the moral imperative outweighed the legal risk. This wasn't about personal gain. It was about liberating France, about saving lives, about ending the war. She appealed to Eddie's sense of duty, his inherent desire to make a difference. She painted a vivid picture of the potential victory, the liberation of countless towns and villages, the return of freedom to a nation under occupation. The fuel they delivered could be the difference between victory and defeat, between life and death for thousands of soldiers. Eddie listened, his reservations slowly eroding under the force of her arguments. He knew the risks were immense, the potential consequences dire, but he also knew that Claire was right. The need was overwhelming, the stakes too high to ignore. With a heavy sigh, he reluctantly agreed. The weight of the decision settled upon his shoulders, but he accepted the risk, knowing that the fate of the war might rest on their shoulders. The Red Ball Express, a logistical triumph, had been created to ensure supplies reached the front lines quickly, and now they were about to take that system into their own hands, for better or for worse. Planning the convoy was a logistical nightmare, a delicate dance of requisition, persuasion, and outright deception. They needed to gather enough fuel to make a difference, find drivers willing to risk everything, and secure a route that minimized the chance of detection. Claire, with her intimate knowledge of the French countryside and her network of contacts, took the lead. She knew which depots were most vulnerable, which officials could be subtly influenced, and which back roads could offer safe passage. Her most valuable asset was her connection to the French resistance, a shadowy network of patriots who risked their lives daily to undermine the Nazi occupation. They were farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, ordinary people transformed into clandestine operatives, providing intelligence, sabotaging infrastructure, and sheltering Allied soldiers. Claire had grown up amongst them. She trusted them implicitly, and they trusted her. She reached out to a local cell leader, a man known only as the Fox, and explained their predicament. The Fox, without hesitation, pledged the resistance's support, promising safe passage through their territory and vital intelligence on German patrols and military police checkpoints. The resistance network was a spiderweb of loyalty and bravery, a testament to the unwavering spirit of the French people. Securing the tankers themselves was an exercise in creative acquisition. Officially, every vehicle was accounted for, every drop of fuel meticulously tracked. But in the chaos of war, things often went missing. Claire, with a combination of charm, veiled threats, and carefully placed bribes, managed to borrow a handful of tankers from a nearby depot. She bartered with a sympathetic supply sergeant, trading promises of future favors and a share of the spoils for the necessary paperwork and a blind eye. A little fuel siphoned here, a replaced manifest there, and soon they had their convoy, a ragtag fleet of tankers ready to roll. The route was carefully chosen, a labyrinth of back roads and forgotten paths known only to the locals and the resistance. It avoided the main highways, which were heavily patrolled by both German forces and the military police. Instead, they would navigate narrow, winding lanes, cross rickety bridges, and traverse treacherous terrain. The journey would be slow and arduous, but it offered the best chance of avoiding detection. The terrain itself was an obstacle, the roads rutted and uneven, prone to washouts and landslides. The tankers, already burdened with their precious cargo, struggled to navigate the challenging landscape. Their first encounter with the military police came sooner than expected. A patrol, 2 jeeps filled with armed MPs, appeared suddenly around a bend in the road. The tension was palpable, the air thick with apprehension. Eddie, behind the wheel of the lead tanker, reacted instantly, slamming on the brakes and pulling the convoy to the side of the road, partially concealed by a thicket of trees. Claire, her mind racing, quickly devised a plan. Feigning engine trouble, Eddie began tinkering with the engine, creating a diversion while Claire approached the MPs with a disarming smile and a fabricated story. She claimed they were a group of farmers transporting fuel to a nearby village, essential for powering their tractors and harvesting their crops. She played on their sympathy, emphasizing the plight of the local population and the importance of their work. The MPs, initially suspicious, seemed to soften under her charm and her plausible explanation. But their leader, a seasoned sergeant, remained unconvinced, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Eddie's quick thinking, combined with Claire's quick wit, managed to avert disaster. But the close call left him shaken, reinforcing his doubts about the wisdom of their undertaking. The risks were becoming increasingly apparent, the weight of responsibility heavier with each passing mile. He glanced at Claire, her face etched with determination, and wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew. The possibility of German Luftwaffe flying overhead and spotting the convoy also loomed. They were taking a huge gamble. Claire, sensing his apprehension, offered words of encouragement, reminding him of the stakes, the desperate need for fuel, and the potential for victory. She reinforced her belief that they were doing the right thing, that the lives they could save outweighed the risks they were taking. Another obstacle arose, testing their resolve, and pushing them closer to the brink. One of the tankers, its engine groaning under the strain of the overloaded tank and the punishing terrain, sputtered and died, grinding to a halt in the middle of a narrow, winding lane. Steam hissed from beneath the hood, filling the air with the acrid smell of burning oil. The mechanical failure was a major setback, threatening to derail the entire operation. They were stranded, vulnerable, and exposed. Eddie, despite his growing doubts, sprang into action. His mechanical skills, honed in his father's garage back in Ohio, were about to be put to the test. He quickly assessed the damage, diagnosing a blown head gasket, a critical component that sealed the engine's combustion chamber. Without it, the engine was useless, a lifeless hulk of metal. Repairing it in the field, with limited tools and under the constant threat of discovery, seemed nearly impossible. But Eddie was resourceful, a master of improvisation. He scrounged through his toolbox, searching for anything that could be used to patch the gasket. He found a piece of leather from an old boot, some scraps of metal, and a roll of adhesive tape. Using a combination of ingenuity and brute force, he fashioned a makeshift gasket, carefully sealing the damaged area. It was a temporary fix, a desperate measure, but it might just be enough to get them back on the road. The clock was ticking, each passing minute increasing the risk of detection and jeopardizing the mission. Patton's offensive was scheduled to begin in a matter of hours, and without the fuel, his tanks would remain idle, his army vulnerable. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate Eddie and Claire. They worked frantically, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate hope that their efforts wouldn't be in vain. Meanwhile, the military police were closing in. Their initial suspicion had been piqued by the earlier encounter, and they had begun to investigate the unauthorized activity. They had questioned local villagers, checked manifests, and followed the trail of rumors and whispers that always accompanied such clandestine operations. Their investigation was intensifying, their net tightening around Eddie and Claire's illegal convoy. Fortunately, the resistance was one step ahead. The Fox, through his network of informants, had learned of the MP's movements and intentions. He dispatched a group of resistance fighters to intercept the MPs, diverting their attention with a series of false leads and fabricated emergencies. They created roadblocks, staged accidents, and spread rumors of German activity, effectively throwing the MPs off the scent and buying Eddie and Claire valuable time. Suddenly, the droning sound of an engine filled the air. Not the familiar rumble of trucks, but the menacing whine of a German Luftwaffe fighter plane. A Focke-Wulf 190, its black crosses stark against the pale sky, swooped low, strafing the countryside with machine gun fire. Eddie and Claire knew they had to act fast. An aerial attack could wipe out the entire convoy in minutes, turning their precious cargo into a burning inferno. "Get to the woods," Eddie yelled, his voice barely audible above the roar of the engine. He and Claire scrambled into the tankers, urging the drivers to follow them as they veered off the road and into a dense forest. The trees provided some cover, shielding them from the prying eyes of the enemy pilot. They huddled beneath the branches, listening to the terrifying sounds of the fighter plane as it circled overhead, searching for its prey. The near miss with the Luftwaffe forced Eddie and Claire to confront a difficult question. Was the mission worth the risk? The dangers were mounting, the odds stacked against them. They had already faced close calls with the MPs, mechanical breakdowns, and now, the threat of aerial attack. The potential rewards, the possibility of fueling Patton's offensive, were undeniable, but so was the potential cost. Their lives, the lives of the drivers, and the loss of the precious fuel. "Maybe we should turn back," Eddie said, his voice laced with doubt. "Maybe this is too much. We're risking everything for something that might not even work." He looked at Claire, searching for reassurance, but her face was etched with uncertainty. The decision weighed heavily on them, a moral dilemma with no easy answer. Were they sacrificing the few for the many, or were they simply throwing their lives away on a fool's errand? Claire paused, her gaze firm. "We can't turn back now. We've come too far, risked too much. If we fail, Patton's army grinds to a halt. How many lives will be lost then? We have to keep going. We have to." The sudden burst of gunfire shattered the uneasy silence. A small group of German soldiers, hidden amongst the trees, had ambushed the convoy. Bullets ripped through the air, pinging off the tankers and sending splinters of wood flying. Chaos erupted as the drivers scrambled for cover, their initial shock quickly giving way to panic. The ambush was a stark reminder of the ever-present danger, the brutal reality of war that lurked just beyond the edge of the forest. Eddie, despite his initial apprehension, reacted instinctively. Years of training and a lifetime of ingrained survival instincts kicked in. He took charge, barking orders and directing the drivers to return fire. He moved quickly and efficiently, using the tankers as cover, his voice calm and steady amidst the chaos. He was no longer the hesitant mechanic. He was a soldier, hardened by experience, driven by a fierce determination to survive and protect those under his command. His combat experience took over, turning the tide in favor of the convoy. Claire, despite her lack of combat training, displayed remarkable courage under fire. She assisted with ammunition, reloading rifles, and handing them to the drivers. She tended to the wounded, offering comfort and administering first aid with steady hands. She moved with a quiet determination, her face pale but resolute, her actions belying her fear. Her presence was a source of strength and reassurance to the others, a reminder that they were not alone in this desperate fight. Just as the situation seemed dire, a welcome sound pierced the air, the war cries of the French resistance fighters. The Fox and his men, alerted by the gunfire, had arrived to reinforce the convoy. They emerged from the forest, weapons blazing, their surprise attack catching the Germans off guard. The tide turned decisively in favor of the convoy, the combined firepower of the drivers and the resistance fighters overwhelming the small group of German soldiers. The firefight was brief but intense, a chaotic dance of bullets and explosions. When the smoke cleared, the Germans lay dead or wounded, their ambush thwarted. But the victory came at a cost. Several of the drivers were wounded, and one of the tankers had been hit, a gaping hole leaking precious fuel onto the ground. The human cost of their actions became painfully clear, a somber reminder of the sacrifices they were making. The realization that lives had been lost weighed heavily on them both. Eddie stared at the damaged tanker, the leaking fuel a symbol of their losses. He questioned whether the risks had been worth the cost. Had their reckless gamble simply resulted in more death and destruction? The moral implications of their choices gnawed at him, a heavy burden on his conscience. He wondered if they had crossed a line, sacrificing innocent lives in the name of a greater good. The justification for their actions was starting to feel hollow. Claire knelt beside one of the wounded drivers, offering words of comfort and reassurance. She looked up at Eddie, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. She acknowledged the losses, the pain, and the suffering, but she reaffirmed their commitment to the mission. She emphasized the greater good, the potential for victory, and the lives that could be saved if they succeeded. "We can't let these sacrifices be in vain," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We have to keep going for them." The weight of responsibility settled upon them both, a heavy cloak woven from guilt, grief, and determination. They were no longer just drivers and a logistics officer. They were leaders, responsible for the lives of those who followed them. They had made a choice, a dangerous and potentially reckless choice, and now they had to live with the consequences. The war had changed them, stripping away their innocence and forcing them to confront the darkest aspects of humanity. They carried the burden of their actions, the knowledge that their decisions had had dire consequences. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the soft moans of the wounded. The smell of blood and gasoline hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder of the brutal reality of war. The convoy, battered but not broken, finally reached the front lines, the scene a stark contrast to the relative tranquility they had left behind. The air here vibrated with the relentless thunder of artillery, the ground trembled under the weight of tanks, and the sky was crisscrossed with the contrails of fighter planes. The stench of cordite and decay hung heavy, a constant reminder of the brutal struggle for survival. Soldiers, their faces grim and grimy, moved with a purposeful urgency, preparing for the next offensive. This was the sharp end of the spear, the point where the fate of nations was decided. The arrival of the fuel convoy was met with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The soldiers, who had been facing the prospect of running out of fuel and becoming sitting ducks, erupted in cheers. They swarmed the tankers, eager to begin refueling their vehicles and preparing for the imminent attack. The sight of the precious fuel being pumped into their tanks was a tangible symbol of hope, a promise that they would not be abandoned, that they would have the resources they needed to fight and win. They recognized the importance of the convoy's mission, understanding that their arrival could be the difference between victory and defeat. The gratitude was palpable, a wave of genuine appreciation that washed over Eddie and Claire, momentarily easing the weight of their burden. Soon after the refueling began, Eddie and Claire were summoned to meet with General Patton himself. The summons was delivered by a stern-faced aide, who escorted them to a command tent situated near the front lines. The tent was a hive of activity, maps and charts covering every surface, radios crackling with coded messages. In the center of the tent, surrounded by his staff officers, stood General Patton, a figure of imposing presence and unwavering determination. His polished helmet, immaculate uniform, and piercing gaze conveyed an aura of authority that commanded respect and instilled both fear and admiration. Patton greeted them with a gruff nod, his eyes scanning them from head to toe, assessing their worth. He was a man of action, impatient with formalities, focused solely on the task at hand, winning the war. He listened intently as Eddie and Claire briefly explained their illegal mission, their voices filled with a mixture of pride and apprehension. When they finished, Patton remained silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. He acknowledged the bravery and resourcefulness of Eddie and Claire, praising their initiative and their unwavering commitment to the cause. He recognized the importance of their actions, admitting that their illegal mission had provided the crucial fuel needed to keep his offensive on track. Without it, he said, the attack would have been delayed, giving the enemy time to regroup and fortify their defenses. However, Patton's praise was ambiguous, tinged with a hint of disapproval. He neither condoned nor condemned their actions, recognizing the necessary evil of their transgression. He understood that desperate times called for desperate measures, but he also believed in order and discipline. He emphasized the importance of winning the war, of crushing the enemy, but he also cautioned against reckless disregard for the rules. "You did what you had to do," he said, his voice firm but measured. "But don't expect a medal for it. You broke the rules, and there will be consequences." As if on cue, the military police arrived, their jeeps screeching to a halt outside the command tent. They were led by the same sergeant who had questioned Eddie and Claire earlier, his face grim and determined. He had followed the trail of the convoy, piecing together the evidence, and he was now ready to arrest them for their unauthorized activities. The consequences of their actions were about to catch up with them. Patton, however, intervened, holding up a hand to halt the MPs in their tracks. He recognized the value of Eddie and Claire to the war effort, understanding that their skills and their dedication were too important to lose. He turned to the sergeant, his voice laced with steel, and ordered him to stand down. "These soldiers," he said, "are under my command. Their actions will be dealt with accordingly. You will not interfere." Eddie and Claire stood there, caught between relief and apprehension, unsure of what the future held. They had delivered the fuel, they had saved the day, but they had also broken the rules, and they knew that they would have to face the consequences. The possibility of court-martial still loomed, a dark cloud hanging over their heads. They were not the same people who had left. War had changed them. The psychological impact of the war had begun to take its toll on both Eddie and Claire. The constant stress, the fear of death, and the moral dilemmas they faced had left them emotionally drained and scarred. They had witnessed the best and worst of humanity, the extraordinary acts of courage and selflessness, as well as the unspeakable horrors of violence and destruction. They were haunted by the faces of the dead, the cries of the wounded, and the memories of the sacrifices they had made. The war had stolen their innocence, replacing it with a weary cynicism and a profound understanding of the fragility of life. The immediate aftermath of the mission was a whirlwind of activity. Patton's Third Army, rejuvenated by the influx of fuel, launched its offensive with renewed vigor. The tanks roared to life, the artillery thundered, and the infantry advanced, pushing back the German lines with relentless force. The extra fuel had provided the crucial surge needed to overcome the initial resistance and gain momentum. The offensive, once teetering on the brink of failure, was now a resounding success, driving deep into enemy territory and paving the way for the liberation of Metz. Meanwhile, the official investigation into the illegal convoy was underway. The MPs, despite Patton's intervention, were determined to uncover the truth and bring those responsible to justice. They interviewed drivers, examined manifests, and pieced together the evidence, meticulously documenting every violation of protocol and every breach of regulations. The investigation revealed the full extent of Eddie and Claire's audacious operation, exposing the unauthorized requisition of fuel, the clandestine route, and the firefight with the German soldiers. The higher-ups were faced with a difficult decision. On one hand, Eddie and Claire had broken the rules, defied orders, and risked everything for the sake of the mission. Their actions were a clear violation of military law, punishable by court-martial and imprisonment. On the other hand, they had achieved a remarkable feat, delivering the desperately needed fuel that had allowed Patton's offensive to succeed. Their bravery, resourcefulness, and unwavering commitment to the cause had saved countless lives and contributed significantly to the Allied victory. After much deliberation, a compromise was reached. Eddie and Claire were commended for their bravery and resourcefulness, their actions deemed necessary under the extraordinary circumstances. Their contribution to the war effort was officially recognized, and they were hailed as heroes by their fellow soldiers. However, they did not escape punishment entirely. They received a formal reprimand for breaking protocol and exceeding their authority. The reprimand served as a reminder that even in times of war, rules were meant to be followed, and that unauthorized actions would not be tolerated. The outcome was a delicate balance between justice and necessity, a recognition that sometimes the ends justified the means, but that accountability was still essential. In the emotional aftermath of the events, Eddie and Claire found themselves forever changed. They had witnessed the best and worst of humanity, the extraordinary acts of courage and selflessness, as well as the unspeakable horrors of violence and destruction. The experience had stripped away their naivete, leaving them with a profound understanding of the complexities of war and the fragility of life. Looking towards the future, Eddie and Claire were forever bound by their shared experience. They had forged a strong bond of friendship and respect, a connection forged in the crucible of war. They had learned to rely on each other, to trust each other, and to value each other's strengths. Their relationship transcended rank and nationality, a testament to the power of human connection in the face of adversity. The story of the illegal fuel convoy became a legend within the Red Ball Express, a tale whispered around campfires and shared in hushed tones. It served as a reminder of the ingenuity, determination, and unwavering spirit required to win the war. It celebrated the unsung heroes who played a vital role in the Allied victory, the ordinary men and women who went above and beyond the call of duty, risking everything for the sake of their comrades and their country. The illegal fuel convoy was a testament to the moral complexities of war, a reminder that sometimes the lines between right and wrong become blurred, and that difficult choices must be made. It highlighted the sacrifices made by ordinary people, the risks they took, and the burdens they carried. It celebrated the human spirit, the ability to overcome adversity, and the unwavering commitment to freedom and justice. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more historical stories that bring the past to life. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think of this story. And don't forget to check out our other videos for more fascinating tales of courage, sacrifice, and ingenuity. Until next time, remember the unsung heroes.